recently I've had this thing that started to happen to me. I don't know what I want to call it, but I've been getting a little pushback on the internet, you could say, a little bit of internet hate. I don't know if you want to go that far. Okay. And particularly when I'm posting for Aldea. For example, recently I posted about how we are a very open-minded and inclusive spiritual community. And someone wrote to us, you lost us at inclusive. Which, first I got to comment, no need for a comma there. Just a very useless comma. So grammar helps. But also, I love how, in 5 words, you can tell us so much about yourself, which is really great. So the next one, I had posted, and I probably reposted something under my personal account, and it was from Aldea, and it was a video from a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you were here when we had our friends share in their gift of interfaith chant, and it was a really beautiful time of music. And so I posted, and I said, here at Aldea, you can explore tradition and practices from a diverse, set of spiritual backgrounds. And someone wrote, someone who knew me from a church I worked at many years ago, and they wrote, "What? I guess you are not a Christian anymore. Praying for you," with the praying hand emoji. So, and I thought, this is nice because I could always use extra prayer. So, but it helped me realize that as individuals and as communities, we can at times be so open-minded, so loving, right, so inclusive, that it can be threatening to some people because it challenges and upsets the status quo. The last one that I want to share with you is recently I posted for Aldea, and I basically said, hey, Aldea is a place where you can there's meditation, there's a talk, and there's music. And, an example of the type of music that you might hear at Aldea is a song like Imagine. And someone wrote to us, do you think Imagine is a good spiritual song? Better re-listen. So, challenge accepted. That's what our message today is going to be. So thank you, sir, for that. But I've been thinking about this song, and it's definitely a song that over the course of my own journey, moving from a type of fundamentalist expression of religion into something more open-minded and inclusive, I realized this song more and more is this anthem. It's been an anthem of peace in our world, and it's also kind of like Amazing Grace for hippies. You know what I mean? I don't know how to explain that, but it just feels right. And so it's something that I want to explore today because we've been in this series of exploring songs that have cultural significance. And it's also been a series about going deep within ourselves, exploring our own spiritual journey in a way that takes us past what has been familiar and into something new. And yet, as we can see from comments like those, for some, it can be comfortable and it can feel safe to stay entrenched in a particular way of thinking. So much so that talk of peace, talk of unity, talk of oneness can feel threatening because it can be a disruption to their story. And yet, friends, I hope today that you and I feel a little uncomfortable because I hope that we also experience maybe a little bit of a disruption to some of our stories. I think it can be a really productive thing to happen in our lives. A couple months ago, I was at the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix. Anyone been there? Beautiful place, and whether or not even you're that into music, it's just a beautiful museum and an appreciation of the diversity of culture and tradition throughout history on this planet. So I recommend that you check it out. And when I visited, they had an exhibit on American folk music, and in this exhibit there was a quote from the American folk singer Woody Guthrie, and this quote says this: "It's a folk singer's job to comfort disturbed people and to disturb comfortable people." Friends, I think it's not just the folk singer's job; it's the artist's job. It's all of our jobs, right? It's what spiritual teachers have done throughout all of time. And it's songs like Imagine that present to us a vision of peace that comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comfortable. right? It provides comfort to the weary. It provides hope to the hopeless. And at the same time, it challenges those who are comfortable, right? It confronts the status quo. And this is what has been happening in our spiritual traditions. It's what's been happening throughout history when people speak truth to power. Jesus was an example of a person whose teaching offered comfort to those who were broken and those who were downtrodden. And at the same time, he offered a challenge to the elite that disrupted the order of the day. Let's bring it more recent. Think about Martin Luther King, how much hope and comfort he offered to those who were oppressed, and yet a stern warning and challenge to the oppressor. When we speak truth, friends, it can act like an equalizer, uplifting those who have been cast down and holding accountable those who have lifted themselves up. And the question I want to ask you is, who are we in this equation, right? Are we the disturbed? Are we the comfortable? Are we the weary? Are we the ones upholding the status quo? The truth is, we are both, right? Right? That there are ways in which we feel weary about the state of the world, maybe more so after Thursday night's presidential debate, right? We probably feel a little disturbed. And at the same time, we also benefit from the current order in ways that we may or may not realize. So my hope for us today is that we are able to take a look at these things, that we are able to find comfort in a hopeful and peaceful vision for the future, and at the same time, that we are able to confront and embrace the ways that we need to be awoken from our slumber. And so let's start with that title, Imagine. Imagine. And as Kathleen so wonderfully brought us into this idea that our imaginative capacity is so important. And I love that this song uses that real gentle metaphor as its kind of guiding theme, because, he doesn't say, hey, let's burn it all down, or let's start a revolution. He's actually saying, let's start a revolution inside first, okay? Let's start with that inner creative force called our imagination. And if we break down that word, it comes from the Latin imago, which means image. So when we imagine, we create an inner image. We bring something into our mind's eye. And this, you could argue, is the most powerful aspect of being a human being. Because everything that has been created on this planet by human beings existed in the imagination first. It existed in the mind's eye first. And for me, I've experienced this in my own life. Like, there are areas where I could work on my imagination. Here's a problem that I have. I am just a ball of chaos in the kitchen, okay? I have just a complete disruptive force. I shouldn't be allowed near a kitchen. And the reason is because I don't do a very good job of imagining things before I go into the kitchen, and so I have a lot of bad ideas in the kitchen. I use the wrong size pan, and I use the wrong size measuring cup, and I'm always transferring one thing to another, and it just becomes a mess because I haven't thought it through, and I haven't been creative about how I want to bring things to be. On the other hand, someone like my partner Olivia, who uses her imagination in such a special way in the kitchen, she can imagine things before she creates them, and she can imagine them so well that she can make things that she's never made before to perfection. And so, I don't use my imaginative capacity very well in the kitchen. She does. But we all have these ways in which we imagine or we don't. I know for me, in the few years before I came here to Aldea, when I didn't even know that a place like this existed, and yet there was a part of me that began to see a vision for what it might be like to be a part of a community that is inclusive, right? That is open-minded, and that is a safe place for people to practice of diverse spiritual backgrounds. And that vision started to become clearer and clearer over time, so that even at the point when I still hadn't yet come into contact with Aldea, but there was a point where I could see an image of something not unlike what we're currently experiencing right now, not unlike a gathering just like this. And what happens in life, friends, is that these clear images that we have start to become a guide for us, okay? Maybe you aren't as comfortable with words like manifestation or prayer, but when we are talking about these types of spiritual practices, what we are saying is that our capacity to imagine can act as a compass for us. It can lead us forward. Have you ever done something in your life that you didn't at first believe was possible? Or have you ever acted in a particular way that you couldn't first imagine yourself doing that thing, right? Everything that we do begins in our mind's eye. And in the same way, do we actually think that it would be possible for us to create a better world if we didn't on some level believe that we could? If we couldn't actually imagine that world together? And this brings me to a concept called positive prayer. And it's something that actually comes from the Christian tradition. And it's really this idea that what if in your spiritual practice, in your dreaming, in your manifestation, in your prayer, what if you approach it not from a place of fear and thinking, I just need this thing to happen, and what if it doesn't happen? What will I do? And instead approaching it from a place of, what if I believed that this thing was already done, right? And I just have yet to experience it. And this idea, friends, this concept of positive prayer was actually what inspired John Lennon to write this song, Imagine, right? We think of this song as, kind of interesting, especially like religious people have been offended by this song for 50 years, right? And yet what's fascinating is he was handed a book of Christian positive prayer, and it's what inspired this song. He said he wrote this song from the concept of positive prayer, because if you can imagine a world at peace with no denominations of religion, and he clarifies, not without religion, but without this, my God is bigger than your God thing, then it can be true. Now, I think the cherry on top is that this quote came from an interview with Playboy in 1980. But let's get back to the idea of positive prayer. It's this sense that when we engage in our spiritual practices, are we doing it from a place of abundance or a place of lack, right? See, friends, I believe that our state in prayer, or our state of mind, our state of being when we engage with spiritual practices, is just as important as the object of prayer or the subject of what we're dreaming about. See, how many people, when we look out at the world today, how many people are out there who they want a better world, right? But the way that they're talking about it, the way that they're approaching it is kind of like, everything's so terrible. This world sucks. Everything's just burning to the ground, right? What if John Lennon had wrote that song, right? There's just so much division. Why do we even try? It just wouldn't have been the same, right? No, but it's songs like this that are like an act of positive prayer. They get us collectively imagining, and it's from that place that anything is possible. Now, before we get too deep into this song, I do just want to acknowledge one thing. Today we are focusing on the song itself. See, often really powerful pieces of art and truth come through human beings, flawed human beings at that. And John Lennon was a very flawed human being. And today is not a defense of John Lennon. It's really a focus on this message that came through him. So that's just something that I want to clarify as we move forward. And we start with the first verse. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Now, I love this first verse because he starts off pretty strong, right? And if you're not on board with it by the first verse, you're probably not going to like the rest of the song, I think Aldea can be like this sometimes. I like that we have our lending library right when you walk in. So if you see a book that kind of offends you, you know what you're in store for the rest of the day. I think dating should be like this too, Like you should just tell up front. Let them know what they have, they have in store for them. Like, I snore, that's just... One thing you can't say about Imagine is it's not a sneak attack, right? It tells you what it is up front. And what it's saying is that the foundational idea of this song is that what matters is today, right? What matters is here. What matters is now. How many of us grew up with some form of a doctrine of heaven and hell, yeah? For me, the message that I took from this, the way that it was communicated to me, was that this life is not as important as the life to come. And that everything you do needs to, in some way, inform this afterlife. It needs to be about that. Now, I don't have too much time to get in too much detail about it, and I encourage you not to take my word for it, but to do your own research. But I will say that this idea that's permeated culture, and particularly in religion and spirituality, that emphasizes heaven and hell and emphasizes the afterlife as the most important part of a spiritual life, is just something that has not always been a part of these spiritual traditions. It's something that came and was added on over time. You know, we talk about how you have these root teachings that are full of beauty and power in how they can affect our human lives here and now, and then institutions and religion get their hands on them, right? And they change the nature of these teachings. And I think one of the best examples of this is an overemphasis on the afterlife, often to create fear, right? Often to grow power, and for institutions to operate from a place of greed. And so the point really I'm making is today is not about whether or not there is an afterlife, whether or not there is a heaven. The truth is no one knows. And honestly, we can leave it at that. The message for today, and the message that I think John Lennon was trying to get across, and honestly, the message that I think is embedded within our spiritual traditions, is really this question: what if we lived as if today, here, now, is what mattered most? Because for me, growing up under a doctrine of heaven and hell actually made me less present, right? It pulled me out of feeling as though the most important thing I could do was loving my brothers and sisters right in front of me, unless that love directly had a relationship to the afterlife. And I think, friends, that our outlook changes quite a bit when our purpose is not about another place and another time, but it's actually about here and now. And I believe that that is very much compatible with our spiritual traditions and even our scriptures, or the scriptures of various religious systems. And so that is really the idea that undergirds this song. And we made it through verse 1, okay? So let's get to verse 2. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Have you ever thought about the way that this world has been constructed by human beings? How it's all based on lines that we draw in our minds, right? Imaginary lines, imaginary divisions. And this even can extend into religion. And as John Lennon said, it's not religion altogether, but it's any kind of religion that has a sort of my God is better than your God, or our way is the right way and your way is the wrong way, right? The world that we live in is one in which we have drawn lines in order to say, this is what's mine and this is what's yours, right? Or this is us and over there is them. And the truth is, generally speaking, the people who get to draw the lines are the ones who hold the power. I want to give an example. Maybe it's a little more of a funny example. Maybe not for the people involved, but we can laugh about it. I want to show you a map of Croatia, okay? And if you look closely, there's this division between Croatia and the country Bosnia and Herzegovina. And now if you notice, Croatia has been very intentional with where they place their borders, right? They want all the coast, okay? And Bosnia is like, hey, can I have even the slightest bit of coast? And Croatia's like, no, we really like the beach. We're a beach-going people, okay? I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. And Bosnia says, please, is there anything you have to offer? And they say, okay, you can have this little bit right here. These lines that we draw, they're really significant in what they actually turn into. They turn into real things that affect human life in a dramatic way. Look at how some of the lines that we draw can be the difference between wealth and poverty, abundance and scarcity. This is something that really occurred to me when we moved here to Tucson. We moved to this beautiful Southwest desert, and the more time I spent here, the more I looked around, and I realized that, call it Tucson, call it Arizona, right? Call it America, though we're right next door to Mexico, right? Call it what you want. This land is far older, it's far more ancient than any names we could possibly give to it. These are all human-constructed ideas. And yet, as Lennon reminds us, think about how much war and how much bloodshed has occurred over these imaginary lines, right? And like I said, religion is an example of something that if it's helping you, if it's making you a better person, if it's an inner path that's making you a kinder and more loving person, great. But the minute that it inspires violence, we're doing something wrong. And so he says, imagine what it would look like to live life in peace. Sometimes when we talk about peace, world peace, and it feels like an empty platitude, right? It feels like something that feels so unattainable. And yet, friends, I don't think it's so ridiculous. I don't think it's so unattainable when we look at all the things that stand in the way, right? We look at all these divisions that we've created, and we recognize that they are all the product of lines that we have imagined as human beings. What if the goal for us is to wake up from this collective trance that we've been under? Because our collective imagination is incredibly powerful to create unity or to destroy, right? To create division. And we can look at all these ways that our imagination has affected our lives and propped up all these different institutions. Think about money, right? Money is not so much a physical reality as it is a symbolic representation of something. And through our imagination, we give it power. Think about nations or one's national identity, right? It's something that we have constructed as human beings. And yet, these concepts have been used to enslave, they've been used to oppress, they've been used to exclude. And in this song, we're being asked this question: what if that very same imaginative capacity was used for peace, right? And what have people so often said to that? Well, just keep dreaming. Well, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Friends, what if the dreamers were actually the ones waking up, right? From this dream of separation. Maybe sometimes it feels more like a nightmare. In the East, they call it Maya, right? This illusion that we all have agreed to. And what if we're starting to wake up and recognize what we've all chosen and said, hey, that's okay, that's just the world we live in. And we're saying, no, what if there was another way? And what if we weren't the only ones, right? What if we weren't the minority in thinking this way? See, there's something called tipping point dynamics or critical mass, and basically it's best explained by something called social diffusion theory. And it would say that, it doesn't take the entirety of the world to be on board with an idea for that idea to have traction. In fact, it only takes this 16% for an idea to gain momentum on its own and to become a movement. And yet, 60% of Americans have reported that they believe that the legalization of gay marriage is good for all of society. 64% of Americans believe that those who are transgender should have protections in the workplace and in the housing market. 69% of Americans believe that we should be exploring alternative forms of energy. 63% of Americans believe that the government should be responsible for health care. Yet why do these ideas not feel accurately represented in policy or in media, right? There must be some kind of problem there. This idea that, man, I can't be the only ones, right? I know I'm not the only one. Sometimes that truth is hidden from us. And I believe that that's why some of you are here. Some of you are here because you said, I can't be the only one that believes that we can do spirituality and religion in a new way, right? I can't be the only one that believes that love can be held above all else, love period, right? And the truth is you're not. You are not. And that recognition that you're not alone by itself is sometimes all we need to pursue this vision of a world of oneness, okay? So remember that. You are not the only one. And if you ever need some encouragement, just look around right now. Okay, we made it through verse 1 and 2. Do we have enough stamina to keep going? Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Yoo-hoo! Some of you might have said, Jake, I was with you for verse 1 and verse 2, but I don't know about this one, No possessions, that's a hard one. And here's the reality. We are a materialist society. We love stuff, right? It's a material world that we live in, so much so that it's hard for us to even recognize how much, okay? And before you think that I'm pointing a finger, I will point it back at myself first, okay? If you've hung around here long enough, you probably noticed that I like to wear hats. And, at the same time, though, I think it's important to have a variety of hats, different colors, textures, shapes. And then one person's definition of variety is going to be different from someone else's. But you can't just have dress hats. You need to have casual hats, And it's good to have a casual hat, from a place you used to live, perhaps. But then, of course, you go and move to new places, and it's good to have hats from the new place that you're living. But we as human beings have been to all kinds of places. So, it's good to just have hats from various, places that are meaningful to you. And I mentioned before, or did I mention variety? This variety is good, So I want to start by just pointing a finger at myself. We all have versions of this, right? We all have ways in which we, without even realizing it, the water that we've been swimming in our entire lives is a materialist water, okay? And it's understandable, and that's why I'm pointing the finger at myself. But it's also important to recognize that this dream of separation, right, this Maya that we are living in is one in where we have imagined all of these things that cause division. And one of those concepts is that of ownership. And so I just want to take a second and for us to think about what has this idea of ownership actually done in our world? What are some examples of harm that it's done? Well, when Europe came here to colonize the Americas, they did so through the stealing of land and in sometimes the purchasing of land in inequitable ways. And really, when they came, they would ask to the indigenous people, who owns this land? And the indigenous were perplexed because they thought, what do you mean own? Owns this land? For example, Crowfoot, chief of the Blackfeet, said this: we cannot sell the lives of men and animals. Therefore, we cannot sell this land. It was put here for us by the Great Spirit, and we cannot sell it because it does not belong to us. Massasoit, leader of the Wampanoag, says, what is this you call property? It cannot be the earth, for the land is our mother, nourishing all her children, beasts, birds, fish, and all men. The woods, the streams, everything on it belongs to everybody and is for the use of all. How can one man say it belongs only to him? As Crazy Horse says, one does not sell the land people walk on. Or lastly, Chief Seattle, we do not own the freshness of the air or the sparkle of the water. How can you buy them from us? Just like all these other aspects of this world that we live in, to own is a concept, right? And if we extrapolate, if we blow up that concept to extreme, depths and heights that we see in our lives, then we realize, hey, this concept is what has caused greed. It's what has caused hunger or allowed for it. The reality is, friends, there is enough food, water, and land on this planet for everybody. It's not a problem of amount, it's a problem of distribution. I heard it said recently that scarcity is a border that we choose to draw inside of abundance. Scarcity is a line that we draw inside of abundance. And this dream of separation that we live in, it takes an abundant reality, and yet we choose to draw lines inside of it to make it a scarce one. Let's talk for a second about billionaires, okay? And I don't need to waste any time with a character assassination of any billionaires out there. All I need to say is this: a billionaire is a person that has more than they could ever hope to use in 1,000 years, even if they were living extravagantly. And in the same time, in the same place, we have people who don't have enough for today. And as a world, collectively, we said, that's acceptable. That's just the world that we live in. That's just the way things are. And there's nothing we can do to change it. So in some sense, we've agreed to that reality that's being presented to us because it's what we were born into. Now, you might think that I'm bringing to you a lot of unsolvable and overwhelming problems. But the reality is, friends, I find great hope in all this because when we look at all of these things, greed, hunger, violence, division, oppression, all of these things are the product of beliefs. That the world has been imagined, that every rule, every hierarchy that we encounter is the product of imagination. And what that means is it can also be changed through that same capacity for imagination. Let's think about us for a second, right? How many of us, within the span of a single day, might feel scarcity, right? We might feel cut off from others. We might feel like our lives are without possibility. We might feel trapped. And yet that same day, we might feel abundant. We might feel connected to not just some people, but to the whole world. We might recognize how the earth is constantly sustaining us. We can feel those ways in one day because our imagination and the way that we see the world, our perspective, has so much power to how we experience our reality. Our imagination, by changing, can change our lives. And yet, this isn't something that happens instantly. It's not something that happens easily. But I do believe, friends, that where we go in life begins with what we believe is possible. So let's just start with you for a second. And let's start with this idea of positive prayer and how it might show up in your life. Think for a moment about something that you want to see. Maybe it's in your life, maybe it's in the world. Like maybe it is world peace, or maybe it's just a better job, or maybe it's a mended relationship with someone in your family. But think about that thing you want. And be honest, how often when you think about that dream and you hold it in your heart, how often do these other thoughts come in that say, oh, well, that's way too far away, that'll never happen, or that's just way too difficult, that's impossible, right? And yet what if, instead of allowing those thoughts to have power, what if you actually let yourself imagine that thing coming to be, coming to pass? What if you allowed yourself, like we're doing in this song, to imagine that better world or that better life? See, how many of us might say that our daydreams actually turned into something tangible? Maybe not exactly what you had envisioned in your mind, but our capacity to dream pulls us in a direction. This is how the world is created. This is how our lives continue to develop. And yet sometimes what we do is we say, oh, I don't want to dream. I don't want to have a positive sense of imagination for what could be, because what would happen if I was disappointed? What if it didn't happen the way I wanted it to? That would feel so terrible. I'll let you in on a little secret. You'll be disappointed either way, right, if it doesn't come to pass. So why not allow yourself in this moment to feel what it might feel like? Why not give yourself that gift? Because fear is always saying, hey, just prepare for the worst, right? Focus on surviving and protecting ourselves. And one of the ways that fear loves to protect itself is to say, hey, aim low so you'll never be disappointed. But love says, the more open that I am, and the more that I open up to give and to share with others, the more that I'm able to receive. It's about not just what comes to pass, but a way that I'm showing up in life. It's about opening up. Love is saying you can open up and it's okay, you're safe. Fear is saying close down, because that's how we stay safe. So here's my encouragement for us today. Aldea, may we keep waking up from this dream of separation, from this illusion that we've been living in, choosing love over fear. And may we carry the torch of this beautiful image of a world at peace, a world living in oneness. And may that be our compass as we navigate all that life may have in store for us.